Mr. President,
Senator Gazelka.
I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant of Arms be instructed to bring in the absentee members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the Sergeant at Arms will bring in the absent members. Members, please stand for the prayer. Today's chaplain is Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Olson from Fairview Evangelical Lutheran Church in Minnetonka. And following the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mr. President. A reading from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 12. And in that day thou shalt say, O Lord, I will praise thee. Though thou wast angry with me, thine anger is turned away, and thou comfortest me. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation. Therefore with joy shall ye draw water out of the wells of salvation. And in that day shall ye say, Praise the Lord. Call upon his name. Declare his doings among the people. Make mention that his name is exalted. Sing unto the Lord, for he hath done excellent things. This is known in all the earth. Cry out and shout, thou inhabitant of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel in the midst of thee. Amen. Let us pray. Lord God, Adonai Eloheinu, as you rule the universe from the highest heaven, bless us with your holy presence. Deliver us from evil threats, terror, and ruthless acts of violence. Let us call upon you in these troubled days, and let us dwell in your deliverance. Let us glorify your true and heavenly presence all our days in peace. We pray for all who serve in lawfully created elective governments, especially in the democracies that strive to protect and preserve human rights with dignity and respect for all people who on earth do dwell. We particularly pray for the people of Minnesota, who are dealing with the effects of winter and the dangers of flooding. Protect farmers and ranchers and all of their livestock. Bless every community at risk. Grant us your blessings of home, family, loved ones, and friends. Protect and enlighten all who are elected to our good government. Bless and uphold our public servants, especially those who deal with safety and security throughout Minnesota. Protect and defend us and all peoples of the earth from all evil, and grant us peace, comfort, and joy through your heavenly presence as we pray and hear, mark, learn, and inwardly digest your holy scriptures. Amen and amen. Amen va amen. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your prayer.
The Secretary will take the roll.
Senators Abler, Anderson B., Anderson P., Bach, Benson, Bigham, Carlson, Chamberlain, Champion, Clausen, Cohen, Swazinski, Dames, Dibble, Draheim, Dietzick, Eaton, Eichhorn, Eakin, Franzen, Friends, Gazelka, Goggin, Hall, Herr, Hayden, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Ingebrigtsen, Isaacson, Jasinski, Jensen, Johnson, Kent, Kiffmeyer, Klein, Karan, Lane, Lang, Latz, Limmer, Little, Marty, Matthews, Miller, Nelson, Newman, Newton, Osmic, Pappas, Pratt, Rarick, Ralph, Rest, Rosen, Rude, Senjum, Simonson, Sparks, Tomasoni, Torres, Ray, Weber, Westrom, Uyghur, Wickland.
A quorum is present. Members, we will begin on the Senate agenda today with the fifth order of business, reports of committees, and in addition to the committee reports listed in the agenda, please make note that there's also an addendum. Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I move the committee reports printed in the agenda and the addendum be adopted with the exception of the reports pertaining to Joint Rule 2.03.
On the adoption of the committee reports, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Moving to the sixth order of business, second reading of Senate bills. The Secretary will read the Senate file numbers.
Senate file numbers 2313, 1644, 1039, and 2075.
Second reading. Moving to the seventh order of business, second reading of House bills. The Secretary will read the House file number.
House file number 15.
Second reading. Moving to the eighth order of business, introduction and first reading of Senate bills. Members listed in today's introduction calendar are Senate files 2726 through 2740. These Senate files are given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving to the ninth order of business, motions and resolutions. There are several authors' motions listed in the agenda. We'll take these authors' motions as one motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. Continuing under motions and resolutions, Senator Eichhorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate File 2562 be withdrawn from the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources Policy and Legacy Finance and re-referred to Environment and Natural Resources Finance. This was mistakenly sent to the Policy Committee when it's strictly Finance. We've talked with both chairs, and the move is fine. It should be in the Finance Committee, Mr. President.
Any discussion on the Eichhorn motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Remaining under motions and resolutions, we will take up the Conference Committee report on Senate File 1743. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the foregoing recommendations and Conference Committee report on Senate File 1743 be now adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
Senator Nelson, to that motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, you will recall that this bill is a result of the unusually harsh winter and Arctic blast in January that we've called the polar vortex, and then the record-setting snowfall in Minnesota during February. In the interest of student safety and due to transportation issues, schools across Minnesota have been closed numerous times, some as many as 13 or more days lost. Members, that's more than 2 weeks of school days. State law requires a minimum number of annual instruction days and hours. There's also a statute that could make a school administrator subject to a misdemeanor and a fine if they do not follow the length of school year requirements. And although the Department of Education was not authorized to penalize a school district for having too short of a school year, there could be a reduction in funding to schools based on the counting of some students who generated fewer hours than prescribed in statute. And as you know, additionally, these concerns were raised about altering spring break, end-of-year schedules, and adding days became difficult as we talked about so many days, graduation, family activities, summer school, and the concern that some schools have construction projects ready to begin promptly at the end of the school year. So that's why we introduced 1743. It was to address this unique and atypical weather situation that was causing concern and planning difficulties to schools because of the canceled days for purposes of meeting the state's calendar requirements. Following passage of the Senate 61-2 and then in the House 105-21, we have the agreement out of the Conference Committee. There are just a few basic differences, members. Number one, this allows public schools to utilize this law, but it does not mandate it. If a school district does not need to use this law or has already made other calendar adjustments, then the law can be ignored in its entirety. That was the Senate position. This permits school boards to count any number of their canceled school days during the 2018-19 school year. This was the Senate and governor's position. The House bill, you might recall, limited this to 3 specific days in January. The conference committee report includes canceled school days due to health and safety concerns, rather just limiting the day to snow and weather events. This was the governor's position. The conference report requires a report to the Education Commissioner on the number of canceled days used. This was the Senate position. If a board counts days where school was canceled for purposes of receiving state aid and meeting the minimum number of days, then it must offer its hourly paid employees additional work hours or compensate them and make them whole. And it must pay its contractors, such as bus companies, the regular rate for those days if the contractor has agreed to compensate its employees for wages lost. That was the House and governor's position. And finally, members, probationary non-tenured teachers can use the canceled days towards being counted under this law for purposes of meeting their minimum number of days in the school year. This was a Senate and House position. Members, I would stand for questions, but I would encourage a swift green vote. Our schools need this assurity as they continue to work with their school calendars.
Further discussion on the adoption of Conference Committee Report for Senate File 1743. Senator Uyghur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I want to thank Senator Nelson for her leadership in getting this bill out in the Senate, and prior to that, for Governor Walz for assuring schools that they will not be punished for protecting students. The bill has been, as compromise, has been very adequately reviewed. I might point out that schools, in the event there was a need for another closing, if it was perhaps a tornado, we hope not, or floods, this would also have a provision to provide flexibility on those days, an important part of the Senate position. The House provisions regarding the assurance that the hourly employees, the contracted employees, something that we talked about in the amendment that Senator Kent had offered, that's provided. To me, members, this is a great compromise, a bipartisan, where we're working together, and it was done in a very transparent way. And within 7 hours, in the open, it was figured out. And so I thank all the conferees for their participation and being involved, and most importantly, it's a win-win for everyone.
Further discussion on the Conference Committee Report. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Senate File 1743 in the Conference Committee Report. As Senator Uyghur said it very well, we worked hard to get this thing done on a bipartisan way. One thing important to my district was allowing the flexibility in the number of days. Favorable school districts were out 11 days during this last year due to tornadoes, weather-related events, and things like that. So I think it's nice to have the flexibility in there, and I surely hope we don't need to add any more days this year in the spring with the rise of the waters, but I think that gives us good flexibility so we would not have to meet again and allow those schools those times in case that would happen. So thank you again.
Further discussion. Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also rise in support of this Conference Committee report. It is the classic example of the compromise process working well. As the Senate author of the House bill that was part of the Conference Committee, I'm really gratified to see that some of those important provisions that take care of our important staff at our schools were taken care of in the process. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the adoption of the Conference Committee report? Seeing none, Senator Nelson renews her motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate File 1743. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Secretary will give Senate File 1743 its third reading.
Senate File Number 1743, a bill for an act relating to education.
Third reading. Any final discussion on Senate File 1743? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 61 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bills be made for special orders for immediate consideration. Members, there's 4 bills on the special order sheet on your desk.
Members, the first bill up for consideration is number 59 on general orders. It is Senate File 1547. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, Senate File number 1547 is the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council bill. This is a bill that's brought to us every year by this council that is made up of a nonpartisan group that for 20 years has provided the leadership over this unemployment insurance system. It includes members from the employer industry, including the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, NFIB, the Minnesota Recruiting and Staffing Association, Minnesota Mechanical Contractors Association, and the Minnesota Council for Nonprofits. It also includes a group of people from the workers industry, including Minnesota AFL-CIO, the Laborers Union, Legal Aid, and a variety of other individuals and organizations with an interest in the program. It also includes 8 members from the legislative body. The bill every year is brought forward that is a non-controversial bill that has complete agreement by everyone on the council. Anything in discussion that is not in agreement is left out of the bill. This is the same bill basically that was here last year that was part of the veto package. There are a couple of relatively minor technical amendments, changing of dates and things of that nature, and also one provision was taken out dealing with some garnishment language. That will be brought up again in this next year and brought forward next year if there is consensus. So with that, I would be willing to stand for any questions.
Discussion on Senate File 1547. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Rorick, for bringing the discussion of unemployment insurance and specifically in the creation of a task force. And, you know, members, it's really a kind of a dichotomy of lifestyles when you have a school bus driver or a school worker who works 9 months and then has 3 months off in the summer. And if that school worker was employed by a private organization, those 3 months that they're off in the summer, guess what they get to collect? Unemployment. But unfortunately, they don't get to collect unemployment because a long time ago, for whatever reason, we established in law that those public school entities aren't able to collect. And now these are, you know, workers that are working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet, local folks. And so with that, I would like to offer the A1 amendment. Excuse me, Mr. President, A50 amendment.
Senator Hoffman offers the A50 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Hoffman moves to amend Senate File 1547 as follows, page 16 after line 28 insert. This is the A50 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. And this is a real simple conversation fix. And again, thank you, Senator Rourke. This is originally Senator Abler's bill. Senator Abler, it was Senate File 1318. And what we're basically saying is now bus or food services providers that are provided by the school district employee will have wage credits, and they're subject to the subdivision 7. So with that, I would hope you see this as a friendly discussion and a friendly amendment, and we can continue the conversation. Mr. President, thank you, Senator Rourke.
Discussion on the A50 amendment, Senator Abler.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this is a particularly good bill based upon the authorship. Anyway, but this is the issue is real. The school bus drivers aren't amongst the highest paid, and actually the training issues for the employers of these school bus drivers is a real issue. And I'm not sure what the fate of this amendment will be today, but this is a big issue that I hope that the council can at least address, and if it doesn't get on the bill today. But these workers who are at entry level actually want to do this for a good long time, and they really struggle in the summers to actually maintain their livelihoods, and they have a hard time getting a job to fill in at these modest wages that they do get. And then when they finally leave, then the employers have to bear the cost of training and safety. And so thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Hoffman, for bringing this issue forward. I agree it's a very important discussion that should be had. These workers, you know, are very similar to construction workers who work a long time during a seasonal work and then are offered unemployment insurance, and I think this discussion should be had, but I believe it's a discussion that should be held at the council level, and I will bring that issue forward to them, but I would ask that members would not support this at this time.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Rarick, thank you by addressing the fact that you believe this is an important issue. Then that would also open the conversation with Senator Abler and I about it. It also addresses some of our technical college employees as well, and these are all the same kinds of provisions. And with that, knowing that Senator Rarick is going to be having this discussion further, I just will withdraw the A50 amendment for further discussion. Thank you.
Senator Hoffman withdraws the A50 amendment. We're back on Senate File 1547. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, the Secretary will give Senate File 1547 its third reading.
Senate File number 1547, a bill for an act relating to unemployment insurance.
Third reading. Any final discussion on Senate File 1547? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll. Members, we're having some technical difficulties with the board. Just please be patient. Members, no pictures on the Senate floor. Members, we're going to take a brief pause. Please be patient. We might have to reboot the service or the system. So please be patient.
Mr. President.
Senator Ralph, for what reason do you rise?
Just to say that it is interesting that Senator Rarick's first bill on the board manages to crash the system. I think that's pretty powerful testament to his abilities.
Members, we believe that we have the system fixed. Members should be able to vote at this point. Okay. It's registering on the screen but not on the board. Okay. Just reset it. Okay. Okay. Members, the votes are registering up here on our screen but not on the board. So what we're going to do is we're going to reset the vote, and hopefully that'll fix the issue. So please continue to be patient. All right, members, I'm told we're going to reset the entire system, and hopefully that will resolve the issue. Senator Bach?
Mr. Chairman, is there an electrician in the House?
Senator Bach, I do believe there is. All right, members, remember now, no applause, but I think we're back in business here. So with no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on final passage of Senate File 1547. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 64 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, the next bill up for consideration is number 108 on general orders, Senate File 1757. Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, today I have Senate File 1757. This bill prohibits the Commissioner of Commerce from using money appropriated to the Department of Commerce to fund any activities related to an appeal before the Minnesota Court of Appeals or the Minnesota Supreme Court concerning the Public Utilities Commission Certificate of Need order involving the Enbridge Energy Line 3 pipeline replacement project. Enbridge started this project when they filed a notice plan with the PUC October 24th, 2014. Since that time, we have witnessed the most extensive environmental impact study for a pipeline project. State agency staff spent 16 months drafting 5,000 pages of analysis that was developed in accordance with the law. The report included information gathered at 49 public meetings and multiple public comment periods. After 4 years and thousands of hours of environmental and cultural study, the Certificate of Need and the route permit were approved. In fact, the PUC unanimously approved the Certificate of Need in June of 2018 and reaffirmed it again in November of 2018. And the PUC approved the route permit in June of 2018 and unanimously reaffirmed it in December of 2018. And as a side note, just 2 days ago, the PUC voted unanimously again to reaffirm approval for the Line 3. This project has received overwhelming support throughout northern Minnesota, more than 90 resolutions of support from federal, state, and local elected officials, including the majority of the counties along the approved route. In addition, 98% of the landowners whose land would be crossed by the project have signed easement agreements with Enbridge. This is a replacement project, which means Enbridge is replacing a 60-plus-year-old pipeline with new technology and safety equipment. This is not only great for our environment, it is also a great project for our state. The company will be investing $2.6 billion of private money in our state. The project will employ thousands of construction workers during the construction process, and our northern Minnesota residents will see property tax relief due to property taxes paid by this upgraded pipeline. This bill was heard March 12th in the Energy Committee. During that testimony that day, the Department of Commerce testified that the appeal was filed or refiled because the application lacked a proper demand forecast to meet the Certificate of Need. Data related to the demand forecast can be found in various reports generated during the PUC hearings. The forecasts submitted by Enbridge were typical of those the PUC has relied on in past certificate of need cases in which the department supported granting certificates. The forecasts are done by modeling. The models in the record showed the lack of capacity for the demand and showed supply increasing. The demand forecasts are done on a need for supply and production. The department declined to object to the company's initial application as incomplete based on its initial review of the forecast. Enbridge submitted. If the department believed Enbridge submitted the wrong type of forecast with its application, it could have argued the application was incomplete. Instead, the department recommended the commission find the application complete without criticizing the Enbridge forecast. The record developed in the case showed that Enbridge mainline system, including the current Line 3, is heavily apportioned, over 20% and as high as 40%. This means that shippers have sought to transport substantially more crude oil over the Enbridge mainline system than the system can accommodate. Those levels of apportionment show inadequate pipeline capacity to meet current demand. No forecasts on the record showed demand for crude oil over the Enbridge mainline system falling below these apportioned levels over the 16-year forecast period. Even the most conservative forecasts on record, including the lowest oil price forecasted submitted by environmental interveners, showed the supply of crude oil transported over the mainline system remaining at or above today's levels over the next 16 years. And in Minnesota statute, it states under the heading of participation by other agencies or political subdivisions. Other state agencies authorized to issue permits for siting, construction, or operation of large energy facilities, and those state agencies authorized to participate in matters before the Commission involving utility rates and adequacy of utility services shall present their position regarding need and participate in the public hearing process prior to the issuance or denial of a certificate of need. Issuance or denial of a certificates of need shall be the sole and exclusive prerogative of the Commission, and these determinations and certificates shall be binding upon other state departments and agencies, regional, county, and local governments, and special purpose government districts. In the Finance Committee hearing, the question was asked, how many times has this happened in the past where one department has taken another to the Court of Appeals to settle an issue? We were told 6, maybe 7, 8 times. We did some research on this and found 5 times since 1987 that one department took another to the Court of Appeals. As an example, in 1987, the Department of Public Service appealed the PUC decision rate, and that claim was affirmed. The only one in 1989, because the PUC had received or had used some outside data, it was found that they couldn't use it. The ruling was against them or changed. 1992, 1997, and again in 2010. Each time these rulings came before, were taken to court, the PUC prevailed, and only in 2010 did the Department of Commerce get involved. So the fact is, the Department of Commerce has only done this once, but the end result shows that past history for the last, 32 years, the PUC has done a good job. Even when they have been questioned, they have prevailed, so they are doing their homework. And in the PUC Commission analysis within the record, it states, after considering the sub-factors
The Commission finds that denying the certificate of need for the project would have the probable result of adversity affecting the future adequacy, reliability, and efficiency of energy supply to Enbridge customers and to the people of Minnesota and neighboring states. So no matter how they look at it, they have tested it and bounced it off of every requirement possible and find that it's the right thing to do. Members, this bill is brought forward because taxpayers are being asked to pay for a political battle that should not be before the courts. On December 18, 2018, the Dayton administration's Department of Commerce filed an appeal of the PUC's decision on the grounds that Enbridge did not provide the proper documentation as prescribed by statute. When Governor Walz took office, he had the opportunity to end the Department of Commerce's appeal or refile. On February 2, 2019, Governor Walz announced that his Department of Commerce would be refiling a motion to reconsider the appeal with the courts. Members, enough is enough. This bill will protect our taxpayers from another ill-advised court expense. I'm asking for your support and a green vote.
Discussion on Senate File 1757, Senator Frentz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Utke. Members, we should vote no on this bill. This isn't about the pipeline. This is about checks and balances. This is about us intervening. Mr. Ludeman, can you hear me? They're saying they can hear me. I feel like I got to start over now. Mr. President, as I was saying, this is about checks and balances. This is about the three branches of government working together. Senator Utke, you touched on the past lawsuits. Governor Pawlenty's Commerce Department sued the PUC. Governor Carlson's Commerce Department sued the PUC. This is a function of government. We should not be telling a department what they can and cannot do with their budget. If PUC had denied the permit and Commerce had sued to allow Enbridge to go forward, do you think this body, the Senate, would be saying we're going to stop Commerce from that lawsuit? The principle is exactly the same. We must stay out of the agencies in the same way we ask the agencies to stay out of the legislature's business. As we go into budget negotiations, we want to have a good, solid working relationship with the administration and with the governor. And a no vote on this bill signals that's exactly what we want. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on Senate File 1757, Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a variety of concerns about the bill being offered, and I really want to make clear, we heard a really nice history of what has happened to this point leading to the lawsuit on Line 3. Unfortunately, that's really not relevant to what our discussion is here today. And I think Senator Frentz really hit on that, and I really want to make sure we're clear about that. 6 times things like this have happened where they've been questioned and brought to an appeals court, 4 times under Republican leadership. You know, I hear from folks that want Senator Utke's bill to be successful that we shouldn't be a part and get involved, that the government should interfere in this process that the PUC and the DNR are working out. And I want to be clear that a lawsuit is a part of the process. That's part of what we've seen happen in the past. This is germane to what is custom and usage of how government works. And so to think that we're going to go down that rabbit hole right now, when have we really forgotten what happened the last time we played this game and we tried to force the governor to sign a bill he didn't like and threaten to defund another organization and then or agency, and then he goes out and he defunds the legislature? Have we not learned anything from our past mistakes and how ridiculous it is when we play these kind of games? I have to agree there is partisanship going on, but it's happening on the floor right now. It's not happening with the governor. The governor is doing the governor's job. The governor is doing the governor's job, making sure no stone is unturned before something happens, that the people of Minnesota can feel confident that all the processes took place, all the protections are in place, and if something does occur, they know the people in the various agencies of government that have oversight looked after it. What we're seeing here is a really sad effort to kind of circumvent that important role both the governor has and the judiciary has. Listen, government's complex, right? It's full of processes that need to take place for it to be successful. There's a lot of interest at stake. And I think that what we're doing is insinuating ourselves unnecessarily in a way that I think is really detrimental down the road. Imagine if I had created a bill that said, okay, if we do that, we're going to remove the DNR's ability to defend its language on permits. So using the exact same logic, going in the exact opposite direction. Not only that, I would argue if the PUC went in the other direction and the Department of Commerce decided to sue that in the other way, I'm sure nobody would be objecting to that right now on the other side of the aisle. So I'm really struggling with bills like this, and partly because if you look at the landscape we're sitting in, what motivation would the governor have to sign this if somehow by some miracle it went through the other body? And maybe that is an important point to take, but to me it's an important point because this is why people get mad at government. They get mad at government because they see us up here spinning our wheels and spending time on things that are never going to happen. And I think that's really frustrating. There isn't a discussion here. One branch is giving another branch a black eye. And I don't think that's a productive way to work in a bipartisan manner. So folks, I hope that you'll really take some time to think about this and understand that there's a process in place. The governor's well within his bounds, and this lawsuit is all about inserting ourselves in a place we're not supposed to be. This isn't about relitigating Line 3, how important or not important it is. It isn't about whether you support Line 3 or not. It's about whether or not it's our job to defund an agency because they're going to do something we don't like. That's just an unacceptable way for us to be operating, and I think this bill not only should be defeated but pulled from the floor. Thank you.
Next on the list is Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with much of what Senator Utke has said today, and I think he is expressing a common sentiment of frustration from northern Minnesota that I hear a lot about each and every day. It's a challenging issue, I think, for all of us, and as we go through the rest of this bill, I think you'll hear from different senators about their perspective and their position on the underlying bill, as well as perhaps some of the underlying issues that led to having this bill in front of us. But I think it's important to consider a couple of points. For the last 4 years, the PUC has extensively reviewed this project using our most rigorous and stringent standards, including holding multiple public hearings, outreach, and testimony, and came to the unanimous conclusion that the line's replacement must move forward. This was the most thoroughly vetted pipeline project in our state and arguably in our nation's history. I personally 100% support and agree with the decision of the PUC. Mr. President, I have to tell you that I am one that believes that climate change is real, and I believe that the actions that we have put forward in our history are accelerating that climate change. I also believe in the protection of our environment. But this has really nothing to do about being pro-oil or helping corporations. The fact of the matter is, we don't get to set Canada's energy policy. They have made it very clear that they will continue to extract oil from tar sand deposits and send it to the international market. That's outside of our control. The further that we delay this project, the greater the risk to our environment and the safety of our communities, and that is 100% fact. But I think what is lost in this discussion is the fact that if you drill into the realities of how this is going to work, the permitting process that has been initiated and is ongoing as we speak is not going to be delayed by the appeal from the Walz administration. The permit process is not delayed. It will continue regardless of whether there was a lawsuit filed or not. The permits will be issued when they are ready. We had this bill in committee, and I voted yes to support this bill. I wanted to send a message of disagreement to the governor. And I think On behalf of Northern Minnesota, that message was received loud and clear. I've had a number of meetings with the Commissioner of Commerce and others in that department, and I'm 100% confident that that permitting process will continue regardless of what happens with this appeal. I think we have to understand that it's okay to disagree with members of our own party. It doesn't happen every day, but sometimes it happens, and I think I respect Governor Walz and his decision and what he needs to do for what's best for him and for the state of Minnesota. But at the same time, I stand up and stick up for myself and my own opinion, just as a senator from the city of Duluth. We don't know how much this is going to cost. The bill essentially disallows the department from having the ability to spend general fund appropriations to their agency on the cost of the suit. I think we can all agree that this bill is not going to become law. I don't think it's coming from the other side of the street, and I can't imagine a scenario where the governor would sign this bill into law. I wish we were spending this kind of money on special education or HHS or public safety, but ultimately this is the governor's decision. And while I believe the appeal will be lost and the permits will be issued and the line will be built and our communities will be safer, I think the bill does infringe somewhat on the rights of the executive branch. And for that reason, Mr. President, today I'm going to vote no.
Senator Limmer.
Mr. President, I impose a call of the Senate.
The Senate is under call. Senator Limmer, do you intend this for the duration of the bill?
This is for the duration of the bill, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. President. Sorry.
Senator Limmer.
Mr. President, I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant of Arms be instructed to bring in absent members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Next on my list is Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. In the Energy Committee, there was a lot of discussion from some proponents of the bill about how the department was newly jumping into this and raising new issues, new concerns, which is not true. There's discussion about how the department was doing the wrong, improper thing. which is not true. The department is doing its job. Senator Utke, I think you mentioned that there were something like 5,000 pages of analysis from state agency. That's the analysis from the Department of Commerce that was behind the appeal here. They're simply doing their portion of it. And yes, people stand strongly on both sides of this issue, on the issue of the pipeline. But the issue here is whether the state agency should do its work. As I think several of the speakers have pointed out, I think there have been 6 times now that Commerce or predecessor agencies challenged PUC rulings, most of them under Republican governors. We haven't intervened in those. We shouldn't intervene here. And it shouldn't be whether we agree with the department or not. I understand why people have that urge to do so. But a few years ago when we were setting up funding for PCA for the lawsuits related to permitting of the Polymet mine, we did not oppose providing funding to defend a lawsuit that I didn't support. It was the agency's responsibility to carry out the law, and they should have the funds to do so. I think, as others have pointed out, this is not likely to become law. I think that's a good thing that this won't, because this is a process that should be continued the way it goes, and let it come out to its natural conclusion. It's been, some people say, well, Enbridge has been fighting this pushing for this for many years, and a lot of analysis and research. And the opponents have been fighting it for many years with lots of analysis as well. And those disagreements are going through the commission. I believe they erred in their decision, but they made their decision, and the department follows through the next step of appealing the process. I think it's the process is going through in an orderly manner, and I urge us to reject this bill.
Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Senator Marty, we're going to have to agree to disagree. We had disagreed in committee, and we're probably going to be on opposite sides on this one. Let's be clear what's happening here. Department of Commerce is appealing the demand forecast that was not, in their opinion, present. They are appealing the activity of the PUC. Well, the reality of the situation is the PUC was already made aware before they granted the permit that the Commerce was concerned about this. And as the author said, that information was strewn throughout the application and the process by which the PUC reviewed this issue. So what the Commerce is doing is saying, well, we told you about this before you made your ruling, and you made your ruling, but we want a second bite at the apple. Who's paying for this? People at home? That's you. No stone unturned? No stone was unturned. If you want to talk about a process, this process, I'm surprised that Enbridge even wants to continue with this because of all the hoops they've had to jump through. We've had this discussion on the floor last year. If you're mad at government, you should be mad that we continue to have intramural squabbles between the governor and the PUC and the legislature. The fact of the matter is this doesn't change anything about the private lawsuits that can continue. This simply says that Commerce has to stop. And why? I just talked about money. In my committee, we are going to be required, the taxpayers at home are going to be required to pay over $1 million for the North Dakota settlement. $1 million of your taxpayer dollars are going down the drain to pay for lawyers' fees for an appeal and a activity that happened that caused us to lose in court. It is ridiculous that we continue to burn taxpayers' dollars on an appeal of something that was already present when the PUC made their determination. Members, and Senator Utke, thank you for bringing this bill. Last year I had the bill to build it now. This bill says, okay, now that the PUC has said go, now we build it now. This is something that needs to be done for the energy future of Minnesota. These are jobs that we know are going to be available, very good paying jobs, to get a pipeline that is running at half capacity now because it is a concern of a 60-year-old pipeline that may have a rupture. And Enbridge is doing the right thing by not running at full speed and having that possibility. So members, vote green on this. It's time to save the taxpayers some money. It's time to say to the governor, you know, Governor, let's stop this activity. Let's actually move forward for Minnesotans' energy future. Thank you.
Senator Marty, if you need to be brief to that point, but there's still a long list under you.
Mr. President, to that point of Senator Osmic's, he just said that an appeal, they shouldn't be appealing it because it has already been decided. You can't raise new issues in most appeals. You can only raise the ones that have all been raised and make the argument that the decision was wrongly decided based on the facts. That's what they're arguing here. They're simply saying the PUC made the wrong decision based on the facts. They're asking for the courts to take a look at that.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Utke, for bringing this bill forward. I think this raises a really interesting point and issue. I don't have so much concern about the Commerce Department's lawsuit here on the appeal. I have a bigger concern about what this means to state government. I'd like to read a little bit about from the press release that the administration put out here when they continued the lawsuit here. And Governor Walz says that when it comes to any project that impacts our environment and our economy, we must follow the process, the law, and the science. I couldn't agree more. We have a pipeline here that's been studied more than any other pipeline in the history of the state of Minnesota. And we've also followed the laws that we have set in place here at the state legislature. Also, the agency's rules, the Enbridge has followed those rules to a T. And it's within the purview of Commerce to debate that. But what I'm more concerned about is what happened in the second part of this statement from the Walz administration, where he says, I've often say projects like these don't only need a building permit to go forward, they also need a social permit. Minnesotans deserve clarity. Members, I think we do deserve clarity. That's why we're here, to set the rules, to set the platform for agencies, for businesses in this state to move forward. How can we move forward if we don't know what the ground rules are? We've got them in the statute books, we've got them in state agency rules, but when you throw out something like we don't need just building permits, we also need social permits, can anybody here tell me what a social permit is? Nobody can, because it's not in law. It's something that's been made up. So what I am concerned about is what our purpose is here today. Why are 67 of us sitting here today in these seats if all the rules and the administrative processes that we put into place, that we oversee, are being ignored, and all of a sudden one man in one administration can say, no, we also need a social permit. I think we have an issue here. I think we have a government function issue here, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is an important conversation to have, and I know I continue to bring it up in committees and in private conversations, but this goes down to the basis of what we are doing here today. So I strongly support Senator Utke's bill, and I will vote green on that.
Further discussion, Senator Bach.
Well, Mr. Chairman, will Senator Utke yield for a question?
Senator Utke will yield. Senator Bach.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Utke, line 1.7 of your bill says the commissioner is prohibited from using appropriations to the department. Senator Utke, can you tell me how much money the legislature appropriated to the Department of Commerce for this current biennium that we're in? I'm just wondering what kind of resources the Department of Commerce has.
Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. President. And actually, Senator Bach, I didn't catch the last part of your sentence as you faded off, so if you could please restate.
Senator Bach.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Utke, how much money did the legislature appropriate to the Department of Commerce in the current biennium that we're in?
Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Bach, I think you're wondering how much we appropriate to the Department of Commerce. I don't have that particular number with me right here. This has to do with the fact that we're saying that they shouldn't use any of those appropriated dollars to continue to fight this appeal. And that's the part we're wanting to basically shut off the faucet so our taxpayers don't continue to throw what I would consider good money down the wrong route.
Senator Bach.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I raise that because I've long felt that the Department of Commerce and the Commerce Committee, specifically the Commerce Chair, doesn't get the kind of recognition and stature around the legislature that their work deserves. I mean, they're the regulatory authority for our entire banking industry, for our insurance industry, at Weights and Measures. There's just a whole lot of things that our constituents interact with the Department of Commerce with, and I think their appropriation reflects that. I think it's not a very sexy committee, let me say, to be on, because they don't have a lot of money to give out like the other divisions under finance do. $46.8 million in the current biennium that's all the general fund that we give to the Department of Commerce. But now let me be clear that my no vote does not at all reflect my position on the pipeline, because I support the pipeline. And members, the reason I support the pipeline is Eric Simonson said it. The oil's going to come in here from Canada. And members, I'll tell you where it's going to come in. It's going to come down through my district, through the little town of Rainier, through Orr, through Cook, on a train. And there are going to be, right now there are 28 to 35 trains a day going through those little towns, and they're 10,000 feet long. And that number is going to go up by about 15% this year. And I just very, very concerned about the day when those trains are nothing but oil, because something will happen. Something very bad will happen, likely at one of the grade crossings in one of these little towns that these trains go through. It is not safe to move oil on a train. And anybody that thinks that we're going to stop oil from coming in by not building a pipeline is delusional. It's going to come in here. But now, having said that, my problem with the bill also is a little bit personal and related to my district. Polymet mining company just received their final permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, so that project now, once it has financing, is going to be able to go forward. 15 years in the making to get those permits. Now, and this legislature has already appropriated money to the DNR because people are lining up to sue over that 15-year process of the environmental review. And my concern is, and we're going to appropriate more money this year, I think. I know there's a bill in to do that. The governor has some money in his budget because we're going to get sued over those permits. My concern, Senator Utke, is I've learned over my years here that precedent matters. It matters as much as anything in this place. What this legislature does 10, 20, 30 years from now, we'll look back at and say, well, they did that back in 2019. The legislature did that once before. And that becomes the crutch that a future legislature leans on when they make a decision to do something that's relatively controversial, that it's been done before. And so I'm just very concerned about that. I was one of the people that was part of the state government finance bill negotiations in 2016 or 15, and the legislative or the state auditor was very upset with a little provision in that bill, and she decided to sue the legislature and didn't prevail in the end, but spent a whole lot of money out of the state auditor's budget to sue the legislature. If this ever somehow became law, I can guarantee you the executive branch, rather than a constitutional officer, would be suing the legislature over the separation of powers. So, Senator Utke, I appreciate your passion for the pipeline. I share it for a little different reasons. My communities won't benefit from the property tax impact, but my communities would put at risk if the pipeline doesn't get built. So, Senator Utke, I'm very, very concerned about the precedent of this that it sets going forward. relative especially to environmental permitting in an area of the state where the only real economy we have other than some tourism is utilization of natural resources, which requires permitting at PCA and at DNR, and those are very long, engaging processes that cost a lot of money. And so, members, just based on the precedent of all of that this is going to create going forward for future members that are going to sit in these desks, it's a very, very bad precedent. I think it likely is a violation of the constitutional provision of separation of powers, and so I would encourage a no vote.
Further discussion on Senate File 1757, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I just want to point out a few things from the PUC record, which is a public information piece, and it's the forecast issue. It's a briefing. And basically, they say forecast for Enbridge was submitted they submitted a detailed demand forecast based on the 2016 Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAP, which is the CAP oil supply forecast. And their key points, their ruling from those 5 commissioners that were appointed by Dayton, says the forecasts were submitted by Enbridge were typical of those the PUC has relied on past certificate of needs. And the department declined to object to the company's initial application as incomplete based on its initial review of the forecast that Enbridge submitted. Instead, the department recommended that the commission find the application complete without criticizing the Enbridge forecast. So, members, it goes on, and I'm not going to read it to you, but I do just want to point out one more thing that they say that I think is really important. In this case, with Line 3, the forecast in the record, together with the evidence of significant persistent apportionment, shows that the denial of the project would adversely impact the adequacy, reliability, and efficiency of delivery of crude oil to all of Enbridge's customers by continuing and possibly exacerbating the significant levels of apportionment of heavy crude oil on the mainline system. And according to the ALJ, without any changes to the mainline system, the existing facilities will not be able to meet future demand. Remember, replacement of Line 3, this is what it is. It's a replacement. It's not a new pipeline. It's already in place. We have obligations to make sure that the energy needs are met and customers' needs are met. That will stifle the economy going forward if we have higher energy costs for something that happened within these chambers and across the hallway. And unfortunately, we did not start this, but the taxpayers are going to end up paying for this argument that we're having. I feel that, unfortunately, too, this has become political. And that is unprecedented when you say there is a social permit for a ruling that from an agency that we rely heavily on, and they came out more clearly than ever that this replacement needs to carry on. And to Senator Bach on his question of the Department of Commerce, I don't know exactly what their budget is, but I do know that they are requesting 5 new FTEs. And my comments, as Senator Osmek has said in committee, I'd like to know how much this is going to cost the taxpayer, because in the end, the taxpayer is going to lose, whether it's another lawsuit, whether it's another higher cost in their energy bills, because we failed to allow a replacement of a pipeline. So, members, thank you, Senator Recke, for bringing this forward. I think this is unprecedented, what's happening, that we allow a political issue to get in the way of good energy policy.
Further discussion, Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I too am rising to stand in support of this bill, because for the people of Minnesota, it seems like enough should be enough. All last year on the campaign trail, we heard about this theme of One Minnesota, how that was going to be the governing style for this new administration. And all this year, as we've started the budget proposals and the rollouts of the budget requests in the different agencies, they come in with this theme of One Minnesota. And members and folks that are watching back home, I think this issue was the first big one that flunked the One Minnesota test. Because this is a proposal that has been thoroughly vetted for years before this regulatory body of the Public Utilities Commission. I forget the exact number, but I know the number has been over 30 separate meetings, separate hearings at the PUC to thoroughly vet out everything that has come up with this issue. And I think back to other times. I mean, I know that I haven't been happy with some of the decisions that the PUC has made in the past, and I'm sure I'm not going to like something in a decision that the PUC makes in the future. But we have this process in place for a reason. And I've been told in the past on other issues that, well, when the PUC decides something, that should be just the way it is and keep moving on. They came and told us that with the issue of the Sherco plant that was in my district. Some of the things that the PUC found in some of the negotiations and some of the hearings that was on the issue of the Sherco plant in my district, well, the response came back, the PUC has decided this way, so it's time to stop the debate, it's time to stop the arguments. The PUC hath spoken, let's move forward. Now here it seems like they come more with an agenda-driven idea than a process-driven idea. That even though we've gone through all of these hearings, it still doesn't satisfy them until we get a particular result that we want. And I told the department when this was before us in our hearing, I said, I hope that in future hearings, I don't hear you try to make the argument on anything in the future about how the PUC has decided something, therefore we need to just move forward without any more discussion on it. I've told them if they try to make that argument to me on a future issue that will inevitably come up in our Energy Committee, I'm going to remind them of this issue here today. Either we're going to decide that we believe in a process or we don't. And we're not saying that we are never going to allow ever again one government agency to sue a government agency, even though I think if we are ever at that point, we really need to think about whether we're in a good spot to begin with. But regardless of that, we're not permanently banning that from ever happening. We're calling out this situation because it has been such high profile, because it has been so thoroughly vetted, because it has gone through this process for years. And it's time to say enough is enough. I believe the administration and the agency know that, but they have their position to defend, and it was interesting watching them in their seats trying to answer the questions that we were giving to them in committee about why they were continuing on with this process. And it's been said by other members here, the taxpayers are going to be the ones who foot the bill. The taxpayers are going to be funding the prosecuting attorneys or the appellates, and the taxpayers are also going to be funding the defense. We get to pay for both sides of this lawsuit. And finally, it's just enough is going to be enough. And when you have to dig as deep, grasping for straws of trying to say social permits in order to justify a decision that you have to make, you might not be in the right position to begin with. So I'm grateful that this bill is coming forward. We need to send a loud and clear message. If we actually believe in one Minnesota, then we need to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Utke, for bringing.
Further discussion on the bill, Senator Eaton.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start by saying this isn't how we do things in Minnesota. If we don't like what a government agency does, the legislature doesn't cut their funds. That's just not how democracy works. I'm really offended at the intrusion into the checks and balances of how our government works. I think it's It's insulting to the people of Minnesota. And I also would like to comment on the worrying about costs for a court case. Nobody was worried in the other party about the costs of the Environmental and Natural Resources Fund lawsuit if we continued to rate it. That was just blown off as no big deal. We needed to do that. Well, that's kind of hypocritical, if you ask me. And whether we should go forward on this pipeline. Well, I want in the last in the Great Lakes region, we've had over 29 leaks. Over 1 million gallons have leaked out of Enbridge pipelines. And when they put in the Line 3 in order to replace it, they plan on taking out 1,700 trees and only replacing half of them. I know we're not debating the pipeline itself, but enough people have raised issues. I think it's time to stop and think and look at this. And the increase in the carbon pollution from this tar sands oil is, with the imminent crisis in our climate change, is something that people really need to stop and think about. This is not something that we need. So I urge members to vote no. Also on the point, as the Milwaukee Journal pointed out, that they don't have enough insurance to cover a spill. It was in the September 2018 issue, if someone wants to check on it. There's so many reasons why this needs to be reevaluated, and however the court case comes out, they need to be allowed to go forward. We do not unfund agencies that don't agree with us.
Further discussion on Senate File 1757, Senator Eichhorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know everything's been said, just not everybody said it yet, so I'll try to go a little different direction. You hear a lot about social permits today, and like Senator Johnson, I don't know what a social permit is either. But to me, when you look at 49 public meetings, multiple public comment periods, over 90 resolutions of support from federal, state, and local entities, 98% of impacted landowners having signed agreements, and hundreds, if not thousands, of well-paying, skilled trade labor jobs going into this project. To me, that sounds a lot like this project has received its social permit from the people that are going to be most impacted by it. Members, people in my district are sick of hearing about waste, fraud, and abuse in state government, and to people in my district, this feels like a lot more waste and abuse. Once again, the taxpayers are going to foot the bill for us to sue ourselves, and that is absolutely ridiculous. Members, I stand in support of Senator Utke's bill, and it would encourage a green vote.
Further discussion on the bill, Senator Tomassoni.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm speaking today because this bill is making a very powerful statement, and I'm hoping that after this bill is done being voted on today, that the Commerce Department decides to withdraw its lawsuit. I see absolutely no reason to be suing the PUC with an intergovernment lawsuit like this. I agree with virtually everything Senator Utke said and virtually everything Senator Simonson said and much of what's been said by several other people on the floor. I support the pipeline 110%. And I want to point out something that Senator Bach also alluded to, and this is about a pipeline that went into effect in 2014 in Wisconsin going through La Crosse. And the article that I'm reading from is from the Madison newspaper, and the Canadian Pacific, which in 2014 was hauling 7 to 11 trains per week on its Wisconsin route, reported in 2016 that its weekly traffic was down to 1 to 3 trains. They virtually eliminated the train traffic by using a pipeline. And the pipeline that we have in the ground right now is an old pipeline, and it needs to be removed. It needs to be shut down, and a new one needs to be put in. The Public Utilities Commission, appointed by Governor Dayton, all 5 of them, reviewed the Certificate of Need, and they reviewed it several different times, and they all agreed that the Certificate of Need was needed, and they unanimously voted to pass the Certificate of Need. I would be willing to bet that if those 5 people were in this legislature, all 5 of them would have voted against the pipeline. But they did their job in the Public Utilities Commission because they followed the law and they looked at the facts. And that alone says to me that this pipeline should be built. This lawsuit is outrageous by the Commerce Department, and that the Public Utilities Commission has done the right thing. Now, having said that, I still haven't decided how I'm going to vote on this bill because I know it's not going to become law. And I also know that the statement we're sending could have some kind of ramifications on other lawsuits that could potentially be against departments and whether or not they can use the money that they have. And I know that the environmental lawsuits that Senator Eaton referred to were not one agency suing another agency. They were private firms or 501c3s suing the government, and that's a much different thing, which is what the PolyMet lawsuit is. And I would say that what we are trying to tell the governor and the Commerce Department here today is to stop doing frivolous lawsuits. We don't need government doing frivolous lawsuits. We have enough frivolous lawsuits coming out of the private sector against many of the things that are going on. And I'm actually outraged that one government agency is suing the other government agency in this particular case. And I would hope that, well, I believe somebody should understand that the reason we're up here arguing this today is because the lawsuit is not necessary and it should be withdrawn. And I'm actually have not decided yet how I'm going to vote on this, and I'm going to make that decision in a little bit here. But I want to applaud Senator Utke for making a very strong statement about what's going on at the Commerce Department, and I don't know what else to say because I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet.
Further discussion on the bill? We're going to give Senate File 1757 its third reading.
Senate File number 1757, a bill for an act relating to commerce.
Third reading. Senator Westrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Tomassoni, I'd urge you strongly to vote yes on this bill, and other members as well, because it's a way to send the message to the Commerce Department to say, welcome to the real world. The average citizen and the average business or person has to realize that at some point you can't just keep paying for litigation because you've got the taxpayers' money, because the private sector doesn't have deep or endless pockets like government agencies do. So welcome to the real world. It's time to adopt what the PUC on a 5-0 decision has approved, that is Line 3 replacement. It is time to recognize the appeals that they've tried that have been denied. And it's certainly the legislature's prerogative, to Senator Eaton's remarks earlier, to pull money back from an agency, because we have the purse strings here, members. The legislative body is the purse strings of government. And when they're misused, they need to be pulled back and reallocated. We have schools that need extra funding. We have health care that need extra funding. We have roads and bridges that need extra funding, and the list can go on. We have rural broadband that needs extra funding. And if the Department of Commerce has the taxpayers' purse to continue this appeal to stop the energy supply and the energy security we need for our state, we have to step in as the adults in the room, as the legislative body, and tell them stop. In the real world, everybody else would have to stop because they don't have endless pockets of money funded by the taxpayers. And when you lose that many times in the PUC or a court, you stop, you recognize you're wrong. And members, as important as security and reliable energy is to our state, our businesses, our residents, our farmers, our traveling public, the list goes on, and the Commerce commissioner comes into our finance committee last week and says they still want to study the global demand, and they haven't felt they've gotten sufficient evidence back on the global demand for the need for this pipeline. Well, members, at some point you have to use common sense. And we all know that in 5, in 10, and in 25 years, it is only foreseeable that we will need to still have a reliable energy supply to heat our houses, heat our businesses, fuel our cars and tractors and semis, even though we have some electric vehicles coming more and more on the market. But members, it is inconceivable to say that we are not going to have the demand and the need for this energy in the foreseeable future. And so for them to put the risk of our state and the consumers and the energy reliability and safety in harm's way by continuing to use taxpayer dollars to appeal and appeal and appeal, that is not the real world. And so I urge your support. Send a message to the department. We've got the purse strings. They are misusing the funds we have given them, and they should not be continuing to spend taxpayer dollars on such a ridiculous appeal that has lost over and over, but is such a key issue of reliable energy supply for our citizens in the state of Minnesota. I urge your support.
Final discussion on Senate File 1757. Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will try to bring this in for a quick landing because we've used up a lot of time here this afternoon and a lot has been said, so I would just be repeating a lot of things. I thank you all for weighing in on this, but bringing us back to the bill. The bill is about funding. We've covered a lot of other issues today, but we're talking here funding on an appeal. A couple things that have been brought up I just want to touch on. In this case, the Department of Commerce initiated this appeal. This is one department against the other. We've heard about the possible, the DNR needing additional funds to work on this polymet, whether it's lawsuits or whatever. But in those cases, our state departments are defending us and their decisions. This is a case of where two agencies that work side by side are suing each other. And the last thing I'm going to say, this bill again deals with funding. We in the legislature are the ones that approve funding. The governor gets to negotiate, the administrative branch gets to negotiate, but funding comes from us, and in this case, we're saying enough is enough on this funding, and we would like to hold it back. So I'd appreciate your support and a green vote.
Final discussion on the bill. Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members. I don't know what the final path of this bill will be, but I'm certain it makes a strong statement. It's not just us here in the legislative branch, but frankly, people in the PUC have spoken out against this. This discussion today, I heard a number of people, both sides of the aisle, express extreme frustration that we're even continuing this lawsuit. And so I hope that we pass this as a green vote. But one other thing I want to say is just because when there's an appeal and it goes farther up the courts, we don't know what the courts will rule and what would happen if the courts turn this down. All of the things that the legislators here from northern Minnesota have expressed would become a nightmare. And so, members, this is a strong statement. I would encourage you to vote green. My hope is that the governor will withdraw the lawsuit and let this go forward.
Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on final passage of Senate File 1757. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 35 ayes and 30 nays, 34 ayes and 30 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Remaining under motions and resolutions, we'll move to the 13th order of business, announcements of Senate interest. Without objection, the following senators will be excused from today's session. Senators Little, Latz, and Ingebrigtsen all day. Senator Benson from 11:30 to 11:55 a.m. Members, any announcements of Senate interest? Senator Eichhorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, as you can probably already tell, there's some of you may have seen the Sea of Plaid. So it's Bemidji Day at the Capitol. We'd just invite you to welcome our friends from Bemidji here today. If you happen to see them, there is also an event here this evening at the Capitol Ridge from 4:30 to 6:30. All members are welcome to that. We didn't pass out a form on members' desks, but there will be an email that goes out. I guess Paul Bunyan was short on paper today, so we'll send an email instead of putting the note on the desk. But please welcome those folks from Bemidji today, and please join us this evening at the Capitol Ridge.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, on your desk, and you should have received one at your office, is an invite to the Dispute Resolution Institute's program on collaboration and negotiation training for legislators. This is being sponsored by the Civility Caucus between both chambers, and I would encourage everyone, if you can attend, please make time in your schedule. I've been through part of it, and it's a good program.
Senator Osment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senators in the Energy and Utility Committee, we will meet at 1:30 to give you a little time to get over there in room 1150. Please be on time. We do have a couple of important bills to get out of committee today.
Members, any other announcements of Senate interest? Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the State Government Finance Policy and Elections Committee, due to start at 1 o'clock, will be deferred to 1:15. But we have a full agenda, so I look forward to seeing you there.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Higher Education Committee, we will be meeting 15 minutes after adjournment in room 15. Thank you.
Any further announcements of Senate interest? Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I move the Senate do not adjourn until Monday, April 1st at 11 a.m.
Senator Gazelka moves that the Senate do now adjourn until Monday, April 1st, 2019 at 11 a.m. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The Senate is adjourned.
Okay.